We are live on the Comics Cube. Welcome back to the Comics Cube. Jeff Smith from all the way from Boneville.
Yeah, but here we are in Boneville. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing all right. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm doing very good.
I'm very glad to hear that, considering the last time we spoke, you had just recovered from a health scare,
Yeah,
and we are very happy that you're doing very well. So,
I'm doing very well. I feel totally normal. I'm back to working out. I'm down here in Key West, Boneville,
like
and
nothing even happened, right?
it's almost like nothing happened.
Yeah.
Almost. It
Other
was
than the memory of things
yes,
happening, I'm
it
sure.
was pretty traumatic in many ways.
Yeah, I get that. We are here because we are talking about the Kickstarter for Bone Deluxe Edition,
Yeah.
Part One, The Valley, which, as of the time we are talking, has 23 hours left to go.
Oh, wow, that's good. I'm glad somebody's paying attention.
I'm gonna paste that link in the chat so that people can go to it and support it. But I wanted to talk to you about that because even though there's only 23 hours left to go, you are well above your goal of $50,000. You are currently sitting at $318,277 with 1,750 backers. Jeff, Bone is so I was talking to somebody about this recently, and I said Bone is the Princess Bride of comics.
Explain yourself, please.
In the sense that if I were to recommend a movie to and I had no idea who I was recommending it to, I would just recommend The Princess Bride because I think there's a very, very good chance that they're going to like it,
uh,
whoever that person is. And
yeah,
if I were to recommend a comic point blank to blind to somebody I don't know, I'm just going to recommend Bone.
I see. Very nice. Thank you.
And I guess my question is clearly there's still a lot of things that we can do with Bone because you did Thorn last time, you're doing the deluxe edition right now. But I did notice that at no point, I mean, you've done several Bone spinoffs since, but at no point have you ever actually gone back to the Valley.
Uh, Almost. I mean, I did the new Tall Tales book, which was a colorized version of the Coda book I did. Was them riding in the desert on the way back from the valley, but they didn't actually go back to the valley. But it was sort of in the time frame, very close. Um, and I can't think of it. I think Big Johnson Bone went to the valley, but that's not quite the same thing.
But the story that you told in the Valley, would say that that's done, right?
Yeah, that's done. That's done.
So we're not seeing Thorn, Grandma Ben, etc. in a new story.
No,
Would we never say never at this point, or just say never? Are
I
we
would
saying
never
never?
say never, no, because well, I mean, even though I don't, I've always said I'm not going to do a sequel. I just mean I'm not going to do another 1,300 page story again. And I've obviously been cheating and been doing these Tall Tales books, which gives me a little excuse to play with the characters again because I love the characters. I love them.
Right.
But I mean, I'm not going to live long enough to do another giant one.
If you guys have any questions for Jeff as we're going along and talking about the Kickstarter or anything else about Bone or anything regarding your other work, please leave them in the chat right here.
Sure.
Um, so regarding this Kickstarter that we have for Bone Deluxe Edition Part One, The Valley, which is the second deluxe edition of your catalog, can you talk to our viewers about what is being offered here?
We started to do something called cartoon books deluxe library editions was the initial idea. We just thought it would be fun to take the Bone stories, all our cartoon book stories really, but just mostly the Bone stories, and do something deluxe with them. Um, like when we went from the comic books to Scholastic, the trim size shrunk. It wasn't significant, but it was a good size down. But that was because they were going to shelve it on regular bookshelves. You know what I mean? Uh, they were making it the size of a regular book, um, but that was smaller. And I've always wanted to make it bigger, like with Rassel. I don't know if you remember, but my
Yeah.
original idea for Rassel was to do a giant book. But retailers really, really cautioned me against that. They just didn't have anything that would fit on the shelves. They were used to big, oversized books coming out and not really selling very well, so they stopped me from making that mistake. But this time, once we figured out how Kickstarter worked and how this relationship really is directly to the reader, to each individual reader, then I realized we could, if the readers want it, they'll get it. And I don't have to convince a distributor. I don't have to convince comic book retailers who would be taking the chance. This is just, Vijaya and I taking this chance. And but what the book is, like I said, it's almost 13 inches tall and 9 inches wide, and it's on nice paper. It'll be in the original black and white. Because Scholastic's doing a great job with the color. But it'll also have a color section in the back that we're calling Tales from the Inkwell, which is really sort of just a behind the scenes kind of thing, talking about, well, the story of Bone and cartoon books. And it looks pretty good. Thorn was the first Deluxe Library edition.
Yes.
So if you saw Thorn and you saw the back matter, which turned out pretty good, I think.
Yeah.
We're doing it with Bone, only it's huge. Plus, we've got an interview that Gary Groth did in the Comics Journal in 1994, right at the end of the first act of Bone, so to speak. So at the beginning of this book, it's just me and Vijaya going, let's try to figure out how to sell comic books. And at the end, it was known after that time period, and there's a Palmer's Picks from Wizard Magazine, which Palmer gave us the permission to reprint it just as it appeared. And in it, he talks about how I went from somebody who just fell off a dump truck somewhere to being, it was one of the most talked about comics around. It took about 2.5 years for that to happen, but it did finally happen fairly rapidly. But that's the story we're kind of telling. We got pictures of, once I started hanging around with Dave Sim and the other self-publishers, Dave would rent the presidential suite of the hotel that the retailer conference was in. Diamond Distributors and Capital Distribution used to put on Comic Cons for retailers. But if you were a publisher, you could register and buy a table, and that way you'd have access to the retailers. And I could also find out whatever all the other publishers are doing, because that's what they did. Is they came in and they pitched, this is what's going to happen to Batman next year, or next year it's going to be the launch of Batman the Animated Series. I remember that in like '92. They showed us the first episode with the Man Bat, and it blew everybody's minds. I mean, we just couldn't believe how it was happening. But I also started talking to retailers and really finding out, how it was doing, how it was working. And there were, some retailers really were into it. I remember Roy Root out in San Francisco. He loved it. And I just met him. And he's going around and grabbing people, bringing Jim Hanley over and all these other massive store owners, bringing them over to show my comic to them. So the early years were very exciting. I sort of didn't really know what was going to happen. I didn't know if it was really going to pull this off or not. And Vijay and I had we together set a year.
Yeah.
And I sold my share. I had a little animation company with some buddies, and I sold my share to them. So I had some money. And Vijaya decided to get a new job in her industry. So we went out to Silicon Valley. We moved from Columbus, Ohio, out to Los Gatos, which is where a
Yeah.
lot of those startups were. Wait,
It's all across the country.
oh, it's pretty far. Yeah,
Yeah.
we went away. So it was all just who knew. I mean, we just did not know what was really going to happen. I thought that the more art kind of books, like coming from Fantagraphics or whatever, that those guys would like it, because I thought I was doing a comic for people that really understood comics and cartoons. They would get it, and they did, but so did everybody else. That was what blew our minds completely. So
The thing we've spoken about this before, but the thing that blows my mind about Bone is that, and it's very hard to conceive of this moment now, given the current comic book landscape, where Scholastic is one of the top two publishers, along with Viz.
yeah.
So really, when people say mainstream comics, people, you really should think about what you're saying. But so it's really hard to think of this moment now. But there was a time when you were putting out Bone that there was nothing like it on the market.
I thought there was. I mean, I thought it was just like I don't know. I just thought it was just like Love and Rockets or something. It was just me doing a comic. And I thought I was surprised at how much people thought it was a unique new thing. Um, at first, that made me nervous, but that I think that ended up being a good thing in a way.
Well, the interesting thing is, I do think, although the bones aren't animals, I do kind of think of them as somewhat in that funny animal genre,
Yeah,
just because of the way you draw them.
yeah,
And
definitely
they're
draw Walt Kelly and Carl Barks, who
right. And
were possums and ducks.
I was gonna say, is like the only, and they even kind of look like Pogo without all of the fur.
Yeah,
So,
somebody shaved Pogo. Get the
uh,
get the
but
humane on the line.
I was gonna say, like the only other thing that I could think of at the time that was combining high adventure with funny animals was Don Rosa's stuff,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. I think in an interview with you, I was talking about how Don Rosa in Europe is just like they practically are just they ought to just make like one of those things where all the slaves would just carry him in a giant throne, because he's so popular over there. It's amazing.
Right. Why do you think, like, because that is interesting to me, because Bone is an international success. Uh, why do you think that somebody like, for example, Don Rosa is less popular in, let's say, America compared to Europe?
I don't know. I mean, I think Don's stuff is great. I
It
love it,
is.
and
Yeah.
he's actually doing. I when I was a kid reading, Bone in the '60s, I was like 9 years old. I picked up on the fact that Barks would, and we talked about this in our last time we talked.
Yeah.
I didn't even know who he was. His name was not in the book. It was like by Walt Disney. But I mean, even at 9, I could see that this was not drawn by the same uh,
Yeah.
guys that were doing most of the stuff. Anyway, I was just talking about Don Rosa. I remember what I was saying. That Barks would weave into the story, mentioning earlier parts of Uncle Scrooge's life. What he was doing on
Right.
and the frontier or whatever, and his first girlfriend, and how he got his first dime, his number one dime. And those little things would pop up every now and then. And I was, man, wouldn't it be great if you could just get all of those books and read them, and you could, if they, I wish that they were drawn, and I could see that whole story. And Don did that.
It
I
did.
think
Yeah.
great. I think it was great.
We have a question in the chat from Mar Hall, who was asking, he's got a couple of questions. One is, will you be telling any more stories with Phony, and Smiley Bone when they go back to Boneville?
I probably won't. I made a decision, not at the beginning, but somewhere in like around issue 6 or 7 or so. I decided I'm not going to ever show flashbacks to Boneville or anything like that. Um, and well, and one of the reasons was is I was starting to finally connect with readers. I was getting letters and or I was starting to see people, get to talk to people on comic book shows. I realized people would describe what they thought Boneville looked like, and they were never just Duckburg, which is all it is in my head, right? I'm sure in the middle of Boneville, there's a giant money vault somewhere, just like Scrooge's. But I actually thought it was interesting that, I mean, some people thought it was, they kind of had like a some kind of something you might imagine on another planet or some kind of, or a fantasy land. And everybody had a different idea of what it was. And I thought that's kind of interesting. Kind of just let everybody picture whatever they want, and that just, I think that worked out okay.
It did work out okay. I will say that towards the end of Bone, you did mention things like the hot dogs and the ice cream and whatnot
Yeah.
from Boneville that Smiley in particular was missing. And I wanted to talk to you about that because I wanted to talk about your storytelling process. Because one of the things I noticed was something like that, right? So Boneville sounds very much like a modern city,
Yeah.
but the valley is very much like a Lord of the Rings or Narnia type
Yeah.
landscape. And obviously juxtaposing the two adds a big element of humor, but did you ever like what is the balancing act there between going for that humor and breaking that suspension of disbelief that you worked so hard to build?
The big trick I figured out was that the world had to be very realistic, and I put a lot of effort into making sure that when they had the carts and things, that they work the way carts work. I figured out how they attach, and I wanted things to be realistic. I made very realistic trees. Um, Anytime I would draw any kind of a building, I wish the internet wasn't there yet, and not didn't quite isn't what now I would just like, or even for Tukey, even though I went to Africa, into East Africa, and took a lot of pictures of rocks and trees and stuff. Um, I still now just go, find me a waterfall in Kenya, or show me a dense forest path or something like that, and I can use that, but I can keep it very realistic looking. And I did the same thing with Bone. I would look up the guy the shoe horseman guy. What does that look like? Trying to make everything very accurate looking and make it real, so that the bones who are clearly not real could exist, and you could just say, oh well, they're just weird looking or something. Uh, After that, I'm not sure. I think it was just, yeah, my love of Lord of the Rings, and uh, that was it. Other than that, that was pretty much it. I did When I was a kid. My grandmother would read Grimm's fairy tales to me, and it was the unexpurgated ones. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but they were not the cleaned up ones. They were ones that they were pretty violent, a little scary sometimes, and but so I always did love fairy tales. I mean, I loved
Yeah.
them. They were scary, but I loved it. So I love it when I meet kids and they're older when they talk to me and they said, "Well, when I was a kid, it scared the shit out of me." I said, "Did you still like it?" I said, "Oh yeah, I love that. I love
Uh, yeah,
that."
because so one of the things related to that question I just asked is because I wanted to ask you again about that suspension of disbelief, because I believe it is within the books that are in Bone Deluxe Edition Part One, The Valley. Um, we will see, you squish and stretch. Phony Bone, upon seeing Lucius's bet, his jaw completely drops.
Yeah,
And
there's a
then
couple of, yeah. I know
there's
what
a
you're talking about. Yeah,
Yeah, there's a couple of
Like
them.
when Phony gets caught eating the pie that Thorne made for Grandma, he shoves it in Fogelman's head, and his head is shaped like a pie, even with a cutout, one piece.
Right.
Yeah,
So yeah,
I don't, I can't. I just thought it was funny, and so that just changes the rules. If it's funny,
because at the same time, at some point, Thorn will use Phone Bone to hit a rat creature, which implies that his head is hard, right?
yes, he does. He has a hard head, but he's a cartoon too, so so it's funny.
Yeah. So I was the incredible thing about that to me was like at no point uh was I ever taken out of the story.
Okay,
So
good.
given the use of that for humor, like I guess my question is like where do you like what is the right amount of humor for a for something with realistic fantasy?
Well, I'll tell you, you made me think of the cartoons where Wile E. Coyote might get blown up, and he's all his fur's burnt. But instantly he just shakes it off and he's normal again. I felt like I had Phone Bone accuse the dragon of not using his fire. Can't you breathe fire? And the dragon goes, and then he's got soot all over his face. But as soot stays there for like the whole next half of the book until he meets Thorn, and even then he's still got soot all over his face. And then finally, when she says, "Well, if there's rat creatures around, we need to get back to the farmhouse. Wash that soot off your face." So then he sits down and he is actually see him washing the soot off his face. I thought that was, I thought it was sort of like the balance to doing the cartoon joke is having a more finishing it off in a more realistic way. It didn't just go away.
Yeah.
He had to actually wash it off.
We
I don't know if
another
I'm not sure if that's exactly what you're asking, but
that no, that is what I'm asking because like there's some things I know and I won't name them. It's like they will put in comic relief in the middle of something serious and then that breaks the scene and you don't do that and I thought that was interesting. It's something that because I was rereading Bone recently in preparation for this. Mar Hall is asking, who is your favorite character?
in Bone,
Yeah,
depends on the day. It's generally speaking, though, it's FOMO because he's the one I made up first when I was 5 years old, and the other characters all just kind of came. But I got to tell you, they all have moments of where they're my favorite characters, and that's all Smiley, Phony. Phony was the most fun to write. It was
yeah,
always fun to write because he just always said just the worst things that you wouldn't say, and of course, Thorne was a very strong, good character that I felt like she really did stand up for something being a good person. Grandma and Phony are tied for who's more fun to write. Um, but I'd say Phone Bone is my favorite
I do think when you told me that grandma was basically Popeye,
character.
I was like, oh yeah, she is.
Yeah, I can't remember. I was doing the comic in this OSU Lantern, the student newspaper, when I discovered the Cartoon Research Library. Lucy Caswell was running it. She's the one she's retiring, but she helped. She and I went to in Virginia, got together and created the CXC, the Cartoon Crossroads Columbus Festival, which we had our 10th show this
Oh,
year. Last,
congratulations. Happy anniversary.
thank you. And it went very well. I'm very happy to say.
I would like to point out to our viewers that if you have any more questions for Jeff, please put them in the chat. Gore Vidal, this is not a question, but he just wants to say that you handle humor very well, much like the Hernandez brothers in Love and Rockets, Dave Sims Cerebus, and Terry Moore Strangers in Paradise. And the four of you form a great quartet.
A great what?
A great
Quartet.
quartet.
Well, thank you. That's very nice.
Um, Going back to the Kickstarter, so I wanted to run through the tiers here. So some people can pledge just $1 or more. to just to back it because you believe in it. And then for $20, you can get the digital PDF. For $50, you can get the trade paperback slipcase tier, which will include the slipcase edition, uh, and it will ship in spring of 2025. You will also still get the PDF, and for $100, you can get the hardcover slipcase.
These are big books. They're like 350 pages, 352 pages actually. They have big colors behind the scenes sections. Slipcase with I did big new art for those, and the guy who colored Bone originally, Steve Hammaker, actually is doing the color for these slipcases, for the covers, for the boxes, and they look dynamite. They look dynamite.
I remember an interview with you many years ago. You saying that you initially didn't want Bone to be colored, and Art Spiegelman convinced you to do so.
That is correct. Well, and Art Spiegelman is one of the reasons I made Bone into a graphic novel, because I just was so impressed by Mouse. I just couldn't. I was blown away by it, and I had been trying to get Bone syndicated and to be a newspaper comic, but they were just wasting my time. I was just I had to make up 2 weeks worth of strips a couple of times a month, and I was doing that for years. And finally, the breaking point. Oh, well, you said you watched
Yeah.
that video, and he talks about that. There were I was talking to two different syndicates, and one of the editors was talking to after 2 years. Turns to me and he says, "I have a great idea. Make the characters talk in thought balloons." Well, nobody else could read their mind. How does that happen? How does that work? And he just says, "Garfield talks in thought balloons." And I was like, "Oh my God, this is the guy, the gatekeeper of one of the top newspaper comic strip syndicates, and he doesn't even know how comics work." I was just like, that was it. That was it. That was the end of my dream of being a comic book guy. I mean, he was nice. He was not kicking me out, but I knew that we weren't ever going to make a comic strip together.
The video you're referring to, for everybody who hasn't seen it, is a video by a YouTuber named Matt with multiple T's. So just type Matt with like 5 T's afterwards, I think. And it does feature an interview with you, framing it within the context of how you changed the market of graphic novels.
I was a little shocked because I did do an interview with him, but I had no idea that he was going to do this story all about me and Vijaya. I had no idea. I liked the video. I thought it was wonderful. He got everything. That whole video is accurate. And I do not understand how he kept all that together and it got the story right. I was very impressed.
As accurate as it is, have you ever stopped to think about the influence you have had on the market?
No, not like that. No, I didn't. No, I did know Marina Telgemeier. I mean, I knew she liked Bone, and she told me that Bone gave her the knowledge that you can do anything. You don't have to do, an autobiographical comic or a superhero comic. That you can do any dumbass thing. Look at Bone. No, but other than that, the way he framed it was like, yeah, it was very nice. It was very nice.
And so aside from you changing the market, one of the running themes in that video is the fact that whenever you ran into somebody who didn't share your vision, you walked away from that person, from that company, from that offer. You just walked away. And I think that comics is full of people, like the history of comics is full of people who have compromised. And you never did.
Yeah, I didn't. I don't know. I don't know. I can't say it worked out. It worked out for me. So yeah.
Right.
No,
and
even that's what happened with Dave Sim. At some point, he just decided. I don't know. I don't know what he decided. He never really explained it to me why he just put me in his Vijay in his comic and wrote about it and made it. I just walked away from him. That was it. He wanted to keep a fight going. He actually wanted to, he challenged me to a boxing match. I'm like, dude, I'm I'm not playing your game, dude. I'm just walking away.
There should be we should have like all of these stories from you guys from like back in the day, like what the comic conventions were like and
I
stuff.
would love it. And even in this book, I talk about Dave, but I don't. But this was the period when Dave was he was extremely helpful to me. He was really good about that. And so there's a couple stories about Dave coming up with great ideas. Okay, so here's one I'll just tell you. It's in the book too, but
Amazing.
he had this. He said, "Here's what you need to do, Jeff. You need to make a nice big oversized limited edition print of the bones and the characters, and advertise it in the back of your book. Limit it to 100 copies. Just make 100 copies. You know, sign them all, and charge $100 for each one." And he says, "You'll make $10,000." Now, I was, I had been through my money from selling my animation company, but Vijaya was still holding me, still paying the bills basically. So I was like, really, you really think that'll work? So I did it, and they sold out immediately. And I was like, "What's your next idea, Dave?"
That's brilliant.
Well, his next idea was
Yeah.
pretty good. It was he got 5 self-publishers together. He and I, Colleen Doran, um, Martin Wagner, and James Owen, and the 5 of us did our characters all play together as if we're a band. And it's a decent print. And we showed up at the 1993 Diamond show, like I was talking about, it was just for retailers. We show up there, but just weeks before, the top artists at Marvel walked out. They were selling comics that were making millions, and they wanted a piece of that, or at least a raise or something. I don't know the details, but Marvel says, guys, comic book readers like the characters, not the creators, and they turned them down. And all 6 or 7 of them, Will Portasio counts or not, all 6 of them just walked out and created Image Comics. And their first books started coming out, and we're selling huge numbers. So that's when we show up with our little portrait with the 5 self-publishers. And Dave is very well known, and his books are popular. And Bone was just on fire. That was when it happened. It was during the cow race that everything just blew up. And we show up at this thing in '93, and all of a sudden the rumors are flying. They're going to form a new Image. This is going to be the next big thing. This is the next thing. And suddenly we went from being the dirty little grubby guys, artists in the corner, to we were as big as Image in importance. Not, I mean, obviously we weren't really doing that, so we weren't making all this money. But the rumors were irresistible to everybody, and we were mobbed. We were mobbed everywhere we went for like the next 3 years. And Colleen, it was cool. We were mobbed. I had lines that felt like they were miles long. I mean, it was crazy. Colleen talks about it. I put this quote in the book, but I don't think I could find it fast enough to share it.
It's okay. Yeah.
But but she talks about how we would get to the show, but there would be just lines, and we couldn't even break for lunch. Or if we did, people would follow us to the restaurant, and sometimes they'd buy us lunch, and we were just signing for it while we're eating. I mean, it was a mad scene. It was really, really, it was very exciting. It was very, very fun to do.
That is really cool.
That was when we showed up with that print. That was the beginning of the self-publishing movement. I mean, obviously there've been self-publishers for many years. Well, really for about 5 or 6 years before that, or even 10 years, when Dave and what's the Peonies, ElfQuest.
Yeah, ElfQuest.
They all started like in '78 or '9 or something. And it had been going on for, over 10 years. So it was 15 years by the time I started. But it just got dubbed the self-publishing movement. I don't know who, I don't remember somebody coming up with that name or anything. It just, people talked about it that way and they started putting it in the press and stuff. I'm going back through all this stuff for the book, and I forgot that there was like a moment when Bone was everywhere. I mean, it had nothing to do with what I was saying or trying to get people to do. It was just, there were articles about the direction of the industry, and they would talk about Bone, or what's the new all ages movement, the new, they really had all these names, and Bone was part of all that stuff. And I actually could hardly think about it because, I mean, for like 2 years I was having trouble selling it, but then we did that print, man, that just changed it.
Wow. And it's amazing to me because you always hear about the stories about how the image guys were getting mobbed. And then turns out there was a whole trickle down effect to you guys too.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. And I have a great picture in the book too. There was one of the, I think it was in San Diego. A bunch of for some reason, the self-publishers before the show opened the first day, we would all end up at my booth and we would all talk and we were all having fun while I'm setting up. And then we all just kind of were walking, back to the hotel or something. We were going through the San Diego Convention Center. We're still inside the event space. And as we're getting towards the door, the Image Comics guys are coming this way. And we just stopped. We just started like, hey, high five, and everything. And somebody got a good picture. I got a good picture that's in the book of, I think it's Eric Larson and Rob Liefeld are the main image guys that were there, and then me and Larry Marder, James Owen was there, Stan Sakai. So it was just like it was a really good time. It was a great time.
Do you think it was because the image guys basically, they went from mainstream comics and then they became their own publishers?
They were self-publishers.
They were self-publishers, and then that made people think, who are the other self-publishers?
Yeah, I don't know.
Right.
I don't know. It was just it was all very good for us, the way it worked out. And they were all cool with us too. They liked us and we liked them.
What's not to like?
Well, and Jim Valentino was he was a real image guy, but his comics were he did a lot of much more independent stuff, more like that as it was just real comics. So, and then Larry Marder, who was one of
Teen World,
he was part of that original tight group that was. We used to go hang out in Dave Sims' suite. We'd go to these retailer shows I was talking about, and then even to the regular comic book conventions. And Dave would get the presidential suite of the hotel that the show was in, and he'd give two or three of us, keys and stuff, and we would just go up there and hang out all day. And I only occurred to me, and we had great galleries there. I mean, there'd be like 20 people in this room at a time. And we were just talking about comics, and we were all so much excitement about owning and controlling our work. And we were trying to figure out how to get graphic novels as more that kind of stuff. That's the kind of conversation we were having all the time. The Jay used to call it, "Are you guys talking about pen nibs?" Because we were sometimes. Anyway, I figured out just recently that when Dave was doing that, I mean, he was kind of, making a statement, right? We got the presidential suite. But then it occurred to me, I never thought about Dave thinking about this, but he must have. He must have thought, everybody at the show knows all self-publishers are up in the presidential suite drinking champagne. And that's the kind of guy Dave was. He thought about stuff like that and pulled it off.
Do you guys all still get together and hang out, or?
Yeah, sometimes. Well, Colleen and I are still very good friends, and Larry Marder. Yeah, we hang out whenever we're together for sure.
That's
Martin, I
very
haven't
cool.
seen Martin at the shows. We're Dave. He doesn't really go to shows anymore.
Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah.
That's too bad. That was one hell of a story. So if you guys have any reactions to that story or any questions, just put them in the chat. I do have to ask you about the fact that you were, we've talked before about how you have an animation background, and that's how you have such a good grasp of gesture and of timing and everything. However, one of the things that I do want to ask about is that animation is a different discipline from comics in the sense that in animation, every picture occupies the same space, whereas in comics, every measure of time is in a different panel. It's in a different space. Was there a steep learning curve when it came to figuring out how to manipulate time when it came to comics?
Um, a little bit, uh, but it was. I felt I got it came. How should I put this? When I spent 3.5 years at OSU at Ohio State doing the Bone Adventures with Thorn and the Dragon and the bad guys, are Wreckers and everything, in 4 boxes of the comic strip. And I understood that. I knew how to remind you what the comic was yesterday, set up a new joke, and then pay off. Um, when I couldn't sell it as a strip, and I realized that that dream was gone, and I moved into comics, and that's a good story too. I saw in my Columbus Dispatch, my local newspaper, there was like a Sunday art section, and there was a 2-page full color spread about this new Batman book that Frank Miller was doing called Dark Knight Returns in
Yeah.
'86. And I'd never seen a comic book even mentioned in the newspaper before. And here's a 2-page spread, and the art that they shared was amazing. So, and I knew there were comic book stores. I'd been to them, but I went to a comic book store to look for that. And I did get the first 2 issues, which were out. The second 2 hadn't come out yet. But what I did see that I didn't expect was Love and Rockets, Cerebus, uh, 8 Ball, Hate. I was looking at all these books, and I'm like, these are guys. Some of them are self-published, some of them are just boutique, little publishers. But it was an indie scene that I was not aware of, and the art on display was staggering. And I bought a copy of each of the books and the Frank Miller book, and I suddenly went, my comics career could possibly be saved. Foam, Bone, and Thorn, it's going to be okay. Yeah, and then I started finding out how to do that.
Marhall is asking, when you finished Bone, did you feel relieved and satisfied with the story?
Yeah, yes, I was definitely exhausted, um, and just getting the ending right was incredibly more difficult than I thought it would be. There's just you just create all these different characters with different needs, and you need to start wrapping everything back together. There's the whole Lord of the Locust plot. There was the Hooded One. There was the Hooded One's backstory and Lucius and Grandma. I had to get everything together. And Phony and Smiley. I really, really, one thing I wanted is, even though Phony and the Bones in general don't really change that much, because they're like Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck.
Yeah.
They stay that way, although they could learn something. I had to figure out a way for Phony to find the missing treasure of the city that the guy who had taken over after Grandma left had hidden in this well, and he figures it out, and he goes and gets it. And I wanted him to have that, and then have it taken away from him, so that he would be burned. He would not win. He needed to not win really good. And of course, you know what happens even later with Grandma. So I don't remember what we were talking about. Where was I going with that? I don't know.
Were you relieved and satisfied with the story?
Oh
I think,
yes,
yeah.
yes, absolutely. It was like I said, it was really took it out of me that last story arc, getting it all to come together. And and I've seen people who have said that it was I kind of blew it off, or I didn't end it the way they wanted it to.
I
But
mean,
most people seem to have really liked it, and I was very satisfied with it. It was exactly what I wanted to pull off.
yeah, frankly, the criticism of you didn't do it the way I wanted you to do it, it's not a real criticism, guys.
Well,
Because
nobody said that. Nobody actually said that.
okay,
They were saying that what they thought was wrong with it was clearly something they thought was wrong, and I didn't. So
yeah. Is there anything you would have changed now looking back at it? Or
no,
yeah,
not because it's perfect, but it's done.
it's
Don't.
done.
I did through over the years as I would put out the collections of trade paperbacks, graphic novels. Um, as I would go into them, I would reread all the comics that I was about to do, and I would know what I've got going, and I would start. I would fix things. There were some drawings I thought were bad. I would fix those. Um, it was well. Once I did the stories about the ghost circles, for example, and the prayer stones. There was a scene way back in, I don't remember, an early issue, 4 or 5 or something, where Bone and Thorn are, digging in, doing some gardening. She was doing some gardening, and Bone's helping her. And they find in the dirt these prayer stones. And well, that doesn't happen in the comics.
Yeah.
They're sort of, she was working in the garden, then it rains, and then they start talking about her dreams in the barn. Well, I decided to extend that by about 2 pages and have them come across these stones with like dragons' faces on them, and she could talk about it. She even talks about ghost circles. This is what I added years later to it, but that then just sounds like it's just like it's like talking about ghosts or something. It don't really, it's not real, right? So I would do that. I would go back and put things in earlier, and try not to, and may have it blend in so it doesn't change the rhythm or strangely add anything or anything like that.
I neglected to mention that you have a $600 tier, which has the hardcover slipcase, 4 ceramic coaster set, 4 individual, I don't know how to pronounce this, croissant pins,
Oh, the cloisonne pins.
cloisonne pins, and a map of the valley, a flip book, which those are always fun, a
Yeah.
phone bone evolution print, an infinite objects animated frame, a special red box set. Like what? That's a lot of stuff.
Well, I, I, I don't know why that was really Vijaya and Kathleen, who's our production manager, um, have done this. This is our third Kickstarter, and they just wanted to simplify it and just put everything in one thing. Just okay. So that was their decision. How many did it say? How many were offered on that?
Oh, 85.
85? Is
There
that
are there are 45 left.
okay? So all right.
I mean, your mystery cow tier, which is $5,500, has a lot more stuff, and there's only one left out of 10.
Well, that's because I do an original piece of art. Like 8.5 by 11 Bristol board. I'll draw that drawing. I'll draw Smiley Bone in his cow costume.
There's still that one left, guys. Come on. Uh, and then you have a commissioned art tier.
That one I'm
That
nervous.
one's gone.
That's gone. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
Terry Moore does commissions like that, and it doesn't scare him at all. It scares me to death
How come?
because like with the Smiley Bone in the cow suit thing, I can do that. No problem. I'm gonna knock that out. I forget however many I did. I'll be able to do them pretty quick. Uh, I mean, not that quick. I mean, it'll probably, each one will probably take me a half hour to an hour to do. But the commissions, they're real drawings. They're not just a character. They're drawings that are going to require detail and scenery, and I pretty much took Terry's model, which is you could have you're going to have one talk with Jeff on the phone about what your commission is and what you think, and then Jeff will do the pencil drawing, share it with you, and I forget Terry had some good language for, like, if you have something that's very important to fix or change, we'll do that one time. And I just feel that I feel really responsible for that. Like, I want people to. It's a real drawing. We're not doing too many of them. I can't remember what the number we put on it was. But it's the first time I've ever done it. Maybe the last.
It doesn't say, because all it says is none left. Oh wait, there were 3 backers for it. So
I
yeah,
must
there
have
were
said I
3.
would do 3. Yeah, there may be a couple more coming up on yeah, and or what are we?
Okay.
Are we in the last 24 hours, or what's left?
We are currently in the last 22 hours. You have $318,557 pledged out of 50,000. So congratulations, Jeff.
Thank you.
And, and
I
another successful Kickstarter.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. Yeah, I didn't know we'd crossed the 300 mark. You're telling me that. I've been working all morning, and I haven't looked a couple days.
That's crazy, huh?
That is really something. Thank you.
Kickstarter has changed the game,
Thank
right?
you, everybody. That is really amazing.
Kickstarter has changed the game, right? It's completely changed
Yeah,
everything.
yeah. I know. I have a pretty good relationship with the distributors, with Diamond, and when our normal procedure is, we're gonna have a book coming out, guys. How well do you think it'll do? And I did that with Tukey, and they said, I may have already told you this, but I said, so how many think you'll get? How many orders do you think how many do you think will sell? And the representative that I deal with says, I can't remember what he said now, like 500. 500 what? Copies for one store? Not one store, but for one day. I was like, what are you talking about? He said, no, that's for that's all we'll sell. 500 copies. Well, so that's when I got on the Kickstarter.
Yeah.
Like 6,000.
Yeah, because like the thing about Kickstarter is, like, you don't have to guess how many you need to print.
Yeah.
These people will tell you.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
we have a question. Yeah, okay, go on.
Well, it's just that the fulfillment it's exhausting. We have to hire people to help us. We get friends and
Yeah.
friends' kids who are high school. Because all it is like, it's just going around picking out the books that go for each order and stuff, putting them in a box. And I don't remember what I was going to say about that, but that's no problem. That's no
But
problem.
at this point, running your 3rd Kickstarter, you've run 2. Have you started noticing things like, oh, it's this person again that has backed it on? Like, does it make you feel
Yes,
closer to your audience?
yeah, definitely. And we're dealing with our audience directly, with our readers. So, and yeah, yes, definitely we know some of them. Yeah,
There's no middleman. It's pretty
there is.
cool.
There's no middleman. It is
Uh,
cool.
we have a question from Olaf Lesniak. It's 2 questions. Is the Valley Deluxe Edition in black and white or in color? It's in black and white. The other question is, which version, black and white or color, do you consider definitive?
Uh, well, I personally I personally like the black and white better. That was how I originally published it in comics, and even originally in graphic novels, it was always black and white. It didn't become colorized until Scholastic approached us and said they wanted to create a graphic novel line for not little kids but middle-aged kids and sell it in schools and in bookstores. Um, and actually, Art Spiegelman was talking to them at the time about doing his tune books through them, and he heard him talking about Bone, and he called me and said, "You need to color it." And I know I've told you the story before, but because he said I should color it, I had to consider it. I mean, it's Art Spiegelman. I mean, he's one of my big heroes. Um, and I'll say it again just because I love hearing. I love telling the story. I asked him why would I color it. I mean, one of the reasons I made Bone into a graphic novel is because of Mouse, which is black and white. And so why should I color it? And he says, well, Mouse is about the Holocaust and the war, and it should be in black and white. But Bone is about life, and it won't be finished until it's in color. Now, I talked to Art about that just a couple of years ago, and he does not remember saying that. It's like, you changed my life, dude. You don't remember saying that.
That's great.
Yeah.
At this point in your career, would you say that you are somebody's Art Spiegelman?
It could be, could be.
Would you know who? Is it Raina Telgemeier?
Yeah, I don't want to talk about stuff like that,
Oh
man.
yeah. Okay. All right, that's fair. And if you could talk, if current you could talk to yourself back when you were first making, like, let's say, Bone number one, what would you tell yourself?
And it's gonna go great. It's really gonna work out, but it's gonna be so much more work than you think it is.
Nothing you would change?
Dude, if I could figure out a way to get more of the work done before a deadline. It seemed like I did 55 issues and it always seemed like I've got to get it in the FedEx on Friday in 4 days. And I have 3 weeks worth of work to do yet. It was always like that. I mean, it was just like the last week of a deadline was murder. And I wish I could have been better about getting that under control. I always made it. A couple times I didn't make it, but it was okay. It was just a little late, but it was.
Is it because you set your own deadline?
Well, yeah. I mean, I set my own deadline, but there's a point where once you put it in the catalog, then the deadline is done. I can't change it.
Oh, okay.
Once I do that, it has to be in the distributor's hands by a certain date. And if it's not, then I can send it in a week later, but they're now returnable.
Okay.
See,
Okay.
normally the retailers will buy them and they're not returnable. So they don't, they usually go pretty light on indie books like that. And of course, then once Bone kind of got its footing and its place in the marketplace, that wasn't too much of a problem.
You finished Bone in single issues, 55 issues, but I think it's safe to say that the bulk of your Bone sales and Bone exposure has been through the graphic novel market. Is that fair?
Absolutely, especially with Scholastic.
The
Between Scholastic and I don't know, we just printed the 30th printing of the one volume edition.
Yeah,
That's a lot, and
I
we
love
print
that.
and we print like 15,000 at a crack or more.
Yeah.
So that's been going well, and we still print that. Scholastic at first, just wasn't that interested. I had just published it, finished it in like May of 2004, and I wanted to get that in my hands for San Diego in July or whatever. and it was a push to get it all, because I had many things that I had meant over the years to tighten up and clean up. Sort of like the thing I just mentioned, the finding some prayer stones early on in the story, so that they didn't just come out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And
Would
all that had to be done at that last minute. Get everything ready for the one volume edition.
would you say that that business model, single issues to trade paperbacks for self-publishers, so not counting Marvel and DC because they're doing their own thing, is still a viable business model? Obviously, you don't need it, but let's say it's somebody who was in your position like 30 years ago, for example.
I don't know. It was clearly the way to do it 30 years ago. That was because even graphic novels. Oh, I mean, they got their first big what to call it,
Boom.
the big boom. Yeah, the big bang of graphic novels was 1986. Watchmen, Dark Knight, and Mouse. And then it was people like me and Neil Gaiman who really we wanted to do graphic novels. And Neil started, he talked DC into collecting, individual arcs for Sandman. I thought that was pretty impressive. And I was doing it too at the same time.
And he kind of acknowledged that with the fact that Grandma Ben is in the last issue of Sandman.
Yeah. Yep.
Let's close this off with some logistical questions. One is we are being asked by Mar Hall. Uh, so this is part one. Do you have a date for part two?
Oh, yes. No, I don't have a date yet. I'm actually thinking it'll be next fall.
Next fall.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It might be a
And
little, yeah. Well, we've been doing them in the fall and couldn't bring them out the next year. So we did this one in the fall. A little later, we meant to do it a little earlier, but we ran into some problems. Then next fall we'll do the second one.
and related to that, what are the plans for Tuki?
Well, I'm gonna take a little time to get finish up my third book of Tukey.
Are you,
I'm gonna take a little time off. This last couple of years have been crazy.
of course,
Yeah.
but
So
would you do the same thing you did with one and two, which is release three and four together?
no, probably not. No,
Okay.
probably just if I could just get to that. I'm actually playing around with the idea of I've got a really excellent first act of the next book. I love it. I can't wait to get back into it. Um, I wonder if I could finish the story in 4 issues, but I think six is it's got to be six because it's important where what he has to accomplish and what it means in the human story. So
I'm going to close this off by asking the question that I know is on everybody's mind, which is, a couple years ago, um, Netflix pulled out of a deal with you for a Bone animated series. And maybe you can't talk about it, but is there any news on that front?
not that I can talk about.
Okay. Thank you so much, Jeff. We have another question. Last question for Olaf from Olaf is, will you do a second printing of your Thorn comic strips collection in hardcover? Asking for a friend.
um, I I don't know. I think not. We overprinted, so we will be taking them to comic book shows, like in San Diego or at CXC, something like that. You will be able to buy copies there.
Okay.
I
But not
don't
in
know
hardcover.
in hardcover, but we overprinted,
Okay.
yeah, so we could take them to shows. There's obviously a limited supply, but
Oh, well, there you go, Olaf. Just show up to one of the shows. Yeah. Like, if you live in the States, I feel like that's easy. Thank you so much, Jeff. This is always a pleasure. I'm so happy that you're doing this Kickstarter, and I think there's going to be four of these, right?
there's going to be the 4 bone books total,
Right.
and then
Um, This is part
And then
one.
and Thorn. So that's five. And we'll see what happens with Tukey.
And then afterwards we'll
Oh, and
see what
Rassel.
else.
We're going to do a Rassel one.
Really?
And I'm not going to change the story at all, but I'm going to add a little more explanation of kind of what was going on and who knew what, when, where, which I wanted to do, but I just ran out of time on the real project in the comic book. And I thought, oh, it doesn't matter. But I've read it a couple times. I was like, it'd be good to get it just a few more pages in, right at the end, when it's really just him and Maya alone in the desert.
Have you ever reprinted the Bone story from Linda Medley's Castle Waiting?
The Bone story. Which one was it? Do you remember what happens in it?
I think they just visit the castle in Castle Waiting, and I think they're on their way back to Boneville or something, or they got lost.
I have no memory of that.
Bro, okay, I'll send it to Kathleen. So
Yeah, just yeah, no
I'll
memory. Was that
try to look for it.
was that in the one that we published, cartoon books?
No, no, no. It was a backup in one of Linda Medley's Castle Waiting issues. Um,
Oh, I don't remember.
or maybe it wasn't Castle. I'll look it up. But thank you,
All
Jeff.
right, I just don't remember.
This was great, and I always appreciate when you come on the show.
It's always fun to talk to you, man. It really is.
Thank you.
All right, see ya.
See ya. Thank you so much. We are done. Okay.
Oh,
Thank you
yeah.
so much. The interview will stay up on YouTube, so